Hi, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions. Hey, today we're going to talk about batteries, but we're going to talk about batteries in a little different sense than what we normally talk to you about them. And that is, one, we're going to talk about lead acid batteries, and the other is we're going to talk to you about them and how they relate to recreational vehicles. I bought my first travel trailer back in the 70s and have pretty much owned a RV continuously since then. And one of the things that has come up over and over is talking about the batteries to run all your 12-volt accessories on the RV. Most of your RV items run on 12 volts, your lighting, your heater fan, the water pump, so forth. Things that don't are your televisions, your microwave, oven, air conditioning. Those things run on AC. But just about everything else in the RV runs on 12 volts. So the issue comes up in that most people buy an RV and it'll have batteries in it already. Some will have two 12-volt batteries and some will have two 6-volt batteries. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little exercise and talk about 12 volts or 6 volts. Which should you use on your RV? And so we'll walk through the issues in regards to 6 volts or 12 volts, and we'll let you make up your mind as to which you will use on your RV. So we're going to do this two ways. First, we're going to look at batteries that are comparably sized. I mean, you can get huge 12-volt batteries and you can get huge 6-volt batteries. But we're thinking about an RV, okay? So we're going to get batteries that are, comparably sized, whether it be the 6-volt or the 12-volt, so that they will fit in the typical RV, whether you have a bumper pull or a fifth wheel like this one. They typically, give you a spot for the batteries, and so you want something that will fit in there. And but that's not to say you can't come up with a setup to allow for larger and greater number of batteries. And if you're going to be dry camping and living off the cord, then that's a common thing to do. But for the sake of this discussion, we're going to try to keep things as much apples and apples and oranges by going with similar dimensions, similar makes. We're going to be talking about batteries made by Trojan Battery Company, just so we can do an honest comparison. So we're going to start off with comparing flooded lead-acid batteries, and then we'll also look at AGM, absorbed glass mat batteries. A lot of people, will get the flooded. They are cheaper than the AGMs, but others like to get the AGMs because they're maintenance-free. And so we'll look at both. So stay with us. So the first one we're going to talk about will be the 6-volt Trojan, and this is the T105. And that's the flooded. And there's 7 inches wide. Now these are approximate. It's probably 7.13 or something like that. I rounded them off. 7 inches wide by 10 1/4 inches long by 11 inches tall. And they're 62 pounds apiece. Okay? Now, there's a couple things that we're going to look at when comparing and discussing the batteries. One is we're going to talk about the 100 amp hour rate. And so this is the amount of current that this thing will deliver over 100 hours. And that's taking it down to, I believe the spec is 1.75 volts per cell, how they do the testing. And so this battery will deliver 230 amp hours at the 100 amp hour rate. Okay? And then the other thing that we're going to compare is how long will this battery go at a certain discharge rate. Okay? And so, because this is a spec that the manufacturer gives, we're going to use this spec. This battery will deliver for 440 minutes at 25 amps. So you can discharge this thing at 25 amps for 440 minutes before you reach a cell voltage of 1.75 or 79 volts per cell, whatever their spec is. But that's the T105, which is a 6-volt battery. Okay? Now the next one we're going to look at is a comparable 12-volt battery. And again, a flooded cell, and it's going to be the 31XHS. And it's 6 3/4 inches wide by 13 inches long by 9.5 inches tall. And it weighs 67 pounds. So it will deliver 144 amp hours at the 100 amp hour rate. And it will go for 225 minutes at a 25 amp draw. But we're going to talk about, this sounds like a lot less, and we're going to talk about that right now. And then we'll do the difference between the AGM batteries. But let's talk about this. We've got two different batteries. We have a 6-volt and a 12-volt. Now, in the RV, everything runs off 12 volts. So the 6-volt, we're going to have two 6-volt batteries in series. Which equals our 12 volts. So what we have in that scenario is we have 12 volts and 230 amp hours. Okay? That's battery number one. With the 12 volt setup, we've got two 12 volt batteries in parallel. So in this case, with them in parallel, we have 12 volts. Grab the wrong pin there. We've got 12 volts. And because they're in parallel, it's going to be 288 amp hours. So everybody with me so far? So we have two batteries that we're comparing here. We're looking at, again, and these are for an RV where you're going to have two batteries. You're either going to have two 6-volt batteries or two 12-volt batteries. If you have two 6-volt batteries, they have to be in series so that you have an output of 12 volts. If we have the 12-volt batteries, they're going to be in parallel. So with the 6-volt batteries in series, we've got our 12 volts and we have 230 amp hours. With our 12 volts in parallel, we have 12 volts and we have a capacity of 288 amp hours. Now, one of the things that that can happen is you can have a cell go out in a battery. And so if you have something happen to one of your batteries, if something happens to one of the 6-volt batteries, and you're kind of dead in the water, if something happens to one of the 12-volt batteries, you'll still have 12 volts, you'll just have half the capacity. Now, how about runtime? Our 25 amp load that we talked about before. Well, we've got the same load going through both batteries because they're in series. So we're going to have 440 minutes at 25 amps. This one, they're in parallel. So we're going to have 450 minutes at 25 amps. Okay? Let's see, what else is important in the big picture here? Well, life cycles. Now, one of the things that affects life cycles in a battery and in lead acid batteries is the rate of discharge. So if you pull out 25 amps versus pulling out 100 amps, the one that only has 25 amps pulled out of it every time will actually have more life cycles than the battery that's having 100 amps pulled out of it every time it's cycled. Following me? So, in this scenario, if we're pulling out 25 amps in our timing case here, the 25 amps, as far as these individual batteries are concerned, our 12-volt batteries, each battery is seeing 12.5 amp draw. Whereas the 6-volt batteries, each one is seeing the 25 amp draw. The 25 amp draws through both batteries. So, you know, there's a little more lead in a 6-volt battery, so they tend to have more life cycles. But they're going to be pulling twice the amps through the 6 volts as we are the 12 volt. Even though we have the same final load, as far as the individual batteries, individual cells are concerned, this one's going to be pulling more So it's probably going to have less life cycles than the 12 volt. Okay? So before we go any further, let's talk real quick about series and parallel. Now, in order to get the 12 volts required for our RV, the 6 volt batteries have to be in series. So we're going to have the positive of one connected to the negative of the other, and the positive. So you can see it's positive to negative. This is our positive, and this is our negative. So between those 2 points, we get our 12 volts. And because all of the current's going to go through both batteries, we only have the capacity of the least one. We're going to assume these are exactly the same at 230 amp hours, and that is the capacity of this circuit, 12 volts and 230 amp hours. This is a series circuit. In the case of the parallel circuit, we have 2 batteries of the same voltage that are connected to like polarity, so positive to positive, negative to negative. And so our voltage isn't increased at all. It's the same voltage, but our capacity increases. So instead of having 144 amp hours, which each single cell has, we now have 288 amp hours. Now remember we mentioned, what if one of your batteries failed? If one of your batteries failed in a 6 volt, you lose the circuit. You no longer have 12 volts. You now have 6 volts, 230 amp hours, which isn't going to do your RV any good. If we lose one of the cells or one of the batteries in the parallel circuit, we still have our 12 volts, but we only have 144 amp hours. Now, again, with the battery here, in the parallel circuit, we have this battery is providing part of the potential that we need, and this is providing part of it. So they're each providing 12.5 amps. Which then is providing our 25 amps for our 25 amp draw that we used in our earlier discussion. And this one, it's all going through the same circuit here. So each battery is seeing a 25 amp load, where each battery in this one is seeing a 12.5 amp load. Okay, hopefully that clears things up a little bit more. So we'll take a look at the AGM specs. So now let's take a look at the AGM. This is the maintenance-free battery, and it's still going to have the same number here. It's just dash AGM. That's the part number from Trojan. And they're about the exact same size as the flooded one. They're 7 inches by 10.25 inches by 10.75 inches. And they're 68 pounds. So they're 6 pounds heavier than the flooded was. They're 1/4 inch smaller in length, and the other dimensions are the same. And it produces 230 amp hours at the 100 amp hour rate. And at 25 amps, it'll run for 440 minutes. Now the 12 volt one is going to be a 31 AGM, 6 3/4 inches. By 13.5 by 9. And it's 69 pounds, where the flooded was 67. And it puts out 111 amp hours at the 100 amp hour rate. And it'll go for, at 25 amps, it'll go for 177 minutes. So let's take a look at what does that mean. Well, that means the 6 volt, the 2 at 6 volt, is 12 volts and 230 amp hours. Remember, these are in series. And at 25 amps, 444 minutes, 440 minutes. Okay? The 2 at 12 volts, again, that's 12 volts. And they're going to be 354 amp hours. And, oops, I made a mistake. Looked at the wrong line here. They're going to be 222 amp hours. 222 amp hours. 111 times 2. At 25 amps, it'll run for 354 minutes. There's my 354. The 177 times 2. Okay? So there you have it. Several things that you have to think about and consider. Weight, maybe, although the weights are close enough as to not be a consideration. Size, they're pretty doggone close in size. The 6 volts tend to be taller, and the 12 volts tend to be longer compared with one another. Individually, the 6 volts have more amp hour capacity, but because it takes 2 of them in series to equal 12 volts, our amp hours don't increase like they do when they're in parallel. And so you can see pretty doggone close there. A little more runtime there, but that's on the AGMs. There's a little different scenario with the flooded. But again, pretty doggone close. So here's the one item that we didn't talk about. So consider what we've shown you, and then depending on where you purchase them, you're going to have that variable right there, the dollar sign. So, you know, the 6-volt batteries tend to be a little pricey, but you're going to have to do that part of the comparison on your own with your local battery retailer, wherever you get yours, and that might be the determiner. Well, there you have it. A little comparison between 6-volt and 12-volt battery setups for your recreational vehicle. We compared the AGMs to one another, and we compared the flooded to one another. As you noticed, flooded cells typically have more amp hour capacity than do the AGMs for the same size. So, little food for thought there. I mean, I know there's kind of two schools. Some people like the 12 volts, some like the 6. I'll let you make up your own mind. If you have any questions, don't leave a comment in the YouTube channel, because typically those aren't looked at. If you want a response, email us at info@evforyounow.com, and we'd be glad to answer any of your questions. As always, we appreciate you watching. If you have any suggestions for future videos, or you have any questions that you think would have broad appeal, let us know. Let us know, again, in an email, and we'll see what we can do to not only answer your question, but make a video that answers the question for everyone. Thanks for watching. See you next time.